Chapter 1, what you are about to hear, happened in a small town in Kentucky, and it forever transformed everyone who witnessed it. At the door of a century-old church, an abandoned sick and dying dog did something so extraordinary that no one could explain it. He did not ask for food. He did not ask for shelter. He simply prostrated himself in silence before the image of the Virgin Mary. Some called it instinct, others coincidence. But for those who were there, it was a sign from heaven. This is the story of Charlie, the dog who learned to pray. It was a rainy October morning. The clock showed just after 6:15 when Margaret Foster, a 71-year-old retired teacher, left her home with her worn umbrella. Every day, at the same hour, she walked to the small church in the heart of town to say her prayers. But that morning, something different awaited her. On the church's doorstep, drenched by the rain, lay a dog, a skinny stray, his fur dull, his body trembling. His eyes were half closed, yet in them remained an expression impossible to forget. Deep pain mixed with a silent plea. Margaret approached slowly. My heart broke at that moment, she recalled years later. It was as if that animal had lost everything and had only found the church as his last refuge. The dog barely had the strength to lift his head. When Margaret knelt and stretched out her hand, he let out a faint sigh, rested his snout on her palm, and remained still as if he had finally found rest. In that moment, Margaret made a decision. She would not let him die alone at that door. Without thinking twice, she lifted the animal in her arms. Even fragile, he seemed an impossible weight, as though he carried all the sadness of the world. And under the relentless rain, she crossed the square toward the town's veterinary office, that of Dr. Robert Wilson. There would begin the battle for Charlie's life. Chapter 2. Dr. Robert Wilson's office was only a few blocks from the church. Margaret arrived soaked, carrying the dog in her arms. The veterinarian, with more than 35 years of experience, needed only a few seconds to realize the seriousness of the situation. Charlie, as Margaret decided to name him, was in critical condition. Severe malnutrition, infection spread throughout his body, profound dehydration. To be honest, Dr. Wilson admitted later, I didn't believe he would survive the first night. It was one of the worst cases of abandonment I had ever seen. Margaret heard the diagnosis in silence. The doctor's words sounded like a sentence. But in her heart, something burned strongly, a certainty that the dog had not stopped at the church door by chance. I won't give up on him, she replied firmly. As long as there is a breath of life, I will fight by his side. And so began an exhausting routine, almost impossible for someone her age. Every 2 hours, Margaret got up to feed him small portions, prepared medications according to the veterinarian's instructions, cleaned his wounds, warmed his fragile body with heated cloths, and above all, prayed for him. The nights were long. Many times Charlie breathed so slowly it seemed he would not survive until morning. Margaret would then kneel by the small improvised bed and say in a low voice, Lord, if this is your purpose, then help me care for this creature until the end. But if there is still hope, give him strength to live. And little by little, against all predictions, Charlie began to respond. First a slight movement of his ear when he heard Margaret's voice, then a more attentive gaze, as if recognizing the presence that never abandoned him. And then, on an autumn afternoon, he managed to take his first steps inside the house. Margaret cried that day, as she had not cried since losing her husband, because she knew that moment marked not just the recovery of a dog, but the beginning of something greater, something no one imagined. Chapter 3. On the third week of care, when Charlie was already able to walk more steadily, Margaret noticed something that left her intrigued. Every morning, always at 6 a.m., the dog left his little bed, walked slowly to the church door, and sat there staring intently. At first, she thought it was just curiosity, but there was something in that gaze, something deep, as if Charlie knew there was a mystery calling him. One morning, Margaret decided to open the church door and see what would happen. Charlie walked in slowly, ignoring the people in prayer, ignoring the wooden pews and the central table. His steps had a clear destination. He went straight to the altar where for more than 100 years stood the image of the Virgin Mary. There, before the mother of Jesus, Charlie did something everyone remembers to this day. He lay down flat on his belly, stretched both front paws forward, lowered his head until it touched the ground, and remained still. It was as if he had prostrated himself in prayer. The women of the congregation, accustomed to seeing that altar silent on cold mornings, covered their mouths in astonishment. Patricia Hernandez, responsible for cleaning the church, testified, "I saw it with my own eyes. He wasn't just lying down. He was praying just like we do before the Blessed Mother." Minutes passed, then half an hour, and Charlie stayed there in complete serenity as if in deep contemplation. Father Daniel Martinez, who was leading the prayer that day, was left speechless. Later, when he tried to describe it, he said, "I have seen people doubt. I have seen people come in here without faith. But never in all these years have I seen a creature surrender like that before the Virgin Mary. It was as if Our Lady were teaching us, through him, what true devotion is." At that moment, Margaret understood. Charlie had not found the church door by chance. He had been guided to the feet of Mary to show that even an animal can recognize the presence of the Mother of Heaven. Chapter 4. After that first day before the image of Mary, everyone thought it was just an isolated event, a curious gesture from a dog that was still recovering. But they were wrong. The next morning, exactly at 6 a.m., Charlie repeated the ritual. He left Margaret's house, crossed the silent square, entered the church, and slowly walked up to the altar. And there before the Virgin Mary, he once again prostrated himself in deep reverence. Once, then again, and again, every single day, rain or shine, in bitter cold or scorching heat, Charlie never failed. For a full hour, he remained still, head bowed, as if offering his own prayers to the Mother of Jesus. It was like a spiritual clock, said Father Martinez. Every day at the exact same time, he placed himself before Our Lady. I've never seen such constancy, not even in many human believers. The first parish ladies began bringing candles to light beside him. Some children, curious, imitated his prayer posture. Soon the church that used to remain almost empty in the early mornings began to welcome more and more visitors. The priest decided to discreetly record with his phone to show those who still doubted. When the videos were shared on social media, something unexpected happened. They went viral. Within just a few weeks, people from nearby towns were traveling hours just to see with their own eyes the dog who prayed before Mary. Caravans began arriving. Entire families entered the church in silence, awed by the serenity of the animal before the altar, and the more people came, the clearer it became. Charlie did not get distracted. He did not move. He did not fidget. He remained completely surrendered, as if his heart was speaking to the Blessed Mother in a way human words could not express. Margaret moved often repeated the same phrase to those who asked. It's not just Charlie who is praying. It is Our Lady calling us back through him. Chapter 5. The little abandoned mutt had become a living symbol, a reminder that true faith is simple, silent, yet irresistibly powerful. And then the first reports began to appear of people deeply touched by that moment of prayer. The testimony that marked the city began in a simple way. One Sunday, David and Karen Mitchell arrived from a trip with their 8-year-old daughter, Emma. Emma had been born deaf. She had never heard her mother's voice, nor the song of birds. The family had already tried doctors, treatments, hearing devices. Nothing seemed to work. When we saw the video of Charlie praying before the image of Our Lady, said Karen, we felt we had to come. It was as if Mary herself was calling us. That morning the little church was silent. The candles flickered before the altar, and Charlie was already prostrated as he always did before the image of the Virgin Mary. Emma watched attentively. She approached, knelt beside the dog, and, imitating him, she also lowered her head. The next day, she returned. She did the same thing, sat near Charlie, picked up the little stones, and kept gazing at the face of Mary. Again, complete silence. But there was something different. For the first time in a long while, her parents saw peace in their daughter's eyes. On the third visit, there was no need to insist. It was Emma who asked to return. She would run to the altar, sit next to Charlie, and stay there for hours, repeating the same ritual with the stones, as if she were learning to pray with him. It was as if Mary were slowly preparing her heart, said the mother. It was all gentle, discreet. But each day my daughter came back home different. Just as Charlie had taught the community to kneel in silence, now he was also teaching little Emma to remain before Mary day after day until the right moment arrived. Chapter 6. Until one winter morning, something changed. While everyone prayed in silence, a small accident occurred. One of the stones slipped from Emma's hand and struck the marble floor with a sharp sound. The girl instinctively raised her head. Her eyes widened as if she had perceived something. It was not a word. It was not a clear sound, but for the first time it seemed her ears had captured something new. Karen, the mother, later recounted with tears. She looked at me as she had never looked before. She didn't need to say anything. I knew that in that instant Our Lady was opening a path within her. That very day, Emma reacted to small noises inside the church. The dragging of a bench, the soft sound of a candle falling. Each noise seemed to find its way into her ears. The news spread quickly. Doctors were called. Tests were repeated. And to this day, no one has been able to explain how a girl who was born deaf suddenly began to hear before the image of the Virgin Mary in prayer beside a dog. The faithful had no doubts. What science could not justify, faith recognized as a miracle. Mary had touched that child in a way no specialist could ever understand. After Emma's testimony, Charlie's story was no longer just a curiosity. Every morning at exactly 6 o'clock, the faithful gathered in the small church to witness that silent moment before the Blessed Mother. Women praying the rosary, young people who rarely approached the altar, men who had not gone to confession for years, returning with tears in their eyes. Charlie, motionless before the image of Mary, attracted not only gazes, he attracted hearts. He did not preach with words, said Father Martinez, but his posture reminded us that Our Lady continues calling her children closer to God. The news quickly spread beyond the limits of the city. Caravans began to arrive. Candles multiplied before the altar, and testimonies of received graces spread everywhere. Chapter 7. A shopkeeper summarized the feeling of all. Our square was empty. Now, since Charlie began his ritual, the city breathes faith again. This is not tourism. It is pilgrimage. As the years went by, Charlie never failed to fulfill his routine. Every day at 6 o'clock in the morning, he crossed the silent square and prostrated himself before the Virgin Mary. Neither cold nor rain, nor the weariness of age ever stopped him. For the people, the answer was always clear. Mary chose the unlikely to rekindle the faith of a generation that no longer believed in miracles. Margaret, the woman who rescued him, always said, Charlie is not the miracle. Mary is, who calls us every day through him, an abandoned animal that found before the mother of Jesus an eternal purpose. The story of Charlie is a living reminder that miracles have not ended. They happen every day when we open our hearts to the love of the Blessed Mother. Years passed, and still Charlie continued his daily pilgrimage. The fur that had once been dull and matted grew healthier, but his devotion never wavered. Morning after morning, season after season, he remained faithful to his calling. The small church became a beacon of hope for the entire region. People came seeking healing, seeking answers, seeking peace. And in the silent witness of a faithful dog, they found something far greater. They found Mary's gentle call back to faith. Margaret grew older alongside Charlie, her own faith deepened by the miracle she witnessed daily. She often sat in the back pew, watching him prostrate before the altar, and whispered her own prayers of gratitude. The priests who came and went all spoke of Charlie with reverence. He had become part of the church itself, as permanent as the altar, as sacred as the image he honored. And still, every morning at 6 o'clock he came, faithful, devoted, a living testament to the power of simple, unwavering faith. Chapter 8. The miracle of Charlie was not just in his faithful devotion, but in how his simple act transformed an entire community. Before Charlie arrived, the church had been struggling. Attendance had dwindled to a handful of elderly parishioners. The younger generation had drifted away, caught up in the distractions of modern life. Faith seemed to be fading from the town. But Charlie changed everything. His unwavering routine became a focal point for the community. People who hadn't prayed in years found themselves returning to the church, drawn by curiosity at first, then by something deeper. They came to witness the dog who prayed, and stayed because they rediscovered their own faith. Father Martinez often reflected on this transformation. Charlie didn't perform miracles in the way we expect, he said. He didn't heal the sick with a touch or speak prophecies. But he did something perhaps more powerful. He reminded us all how to pray with pure devotion, without pretense, without distraction. The church began offering more services to accommodate the growing crowds. Prayer groups formed. The youth ministry was revitalized. People volunteered to help maintain the church and grounds. The once quiet building now bustled with life and purpose. Local businesses near the square began to thrive again as pilgrims came from distant towns. But it wasn't just economic revival. It was spiritual renewal. Families reconciled. Addicts found strength to recover. The lost found direction. And at the center of it all was Charlie, prostrate before the Virgin Mary every morning at 6 o'clock, completely unaware of the movement he had sparked. He simply prayed, and in his simplicity, he showed everyone the path back to faith. Margaret watched it all unfold with quiet amazement, knowing that rescuing that dying dog had been part of a divine plan far greater than she could have imagined. Chapter 9. As word of Charlie's devotion spread beyond Kentucky, journalists began arriving. Television crews set up cameras. Reporters interviewed Margaret, Father Martinez, and the parishioners who had witnessed the transformation. Some came as skeptics, determined to expose what they assumed was a hoax or exaggeration. But even the most cynical reporters fell silent when they witnessed Charlie's prayer ritual in person. One journalist from a major national network later wrote, "I arrived expecting to debunk a local legend. I left questioning everything I thought I knew about faith. That dog's devotion was more genuine than anything I'd seen in years of covering religious stories." The scientific community also took interest. Veterinarians and animal behaviorists tried to explain Charlie's behavior through conditioning, routine, or coincidence. But none of their theories could account for the consistency, the timing, or the profound effect his actions had on those who witnessed them. Dr. Wilson, who had saved Charlie's life years earlier, was frequently asked for his opinion. "I'm a man of science," he would say. "I deal in facts and evidence. But what I've seen with Charlie defies medical explanation. That dog should have died. Instead, he's become something I can't explain, a messenger perhaps." What made Charlie's story even more remarkable was its authenticity. There was no commercialization, no exploitation. The church refused donations beyond normal offerings. Margaret declined book deals and movie offers. Father Martinez turned away those who wanted to use Charlie for publicity. "This isn't about fame or profit," Margaret insisted. "This is about Mary's message to us. Charlie belongs to her, not to us." And so Charlie continued his daily ritual, undisturbed by cameras or crowds, focused only on the image of the Virgin Mary before him. His devotion remained pure, untainted by the attention swirling around him. Chapter 10. Beyond Emma's restored hearing, other testimonies began to emerge from those who had prayed alongside Charlie. A woman battling cancer reported that after 3 weeks of morning prayer beside the dog, her tumors had inexplicably shrunk. Doctors called it spontaneous remission, but she knew better. A man struggling with decades of addiction found himself suddenly free of cravings after kneeling next to Charlie one October morning. "It was like chains breaking," he testified. "I felt Mary's presence so strongly, and I knew I was healed." A couple on the verge of divorce came to see Charlie out of desperation. Something about witnessing his simple devotion made them realize what they had lost. They reconciled that very day, renewing their commitment before the same altar where Charlie prayed. These stories multiplied. Not everyone experienced dramatic healings, but everyone reported feeling something: peace, hope, clarity, or simply the sense that they were not alone. Father Martinez began keeping a journal of testimonies. Within 2 years, he had documented over 300 accounts of graces received by those who had prayed in Charlie's presence. I'm not saying Charlie is performing miracles, Father Martinez carefully explained to visitors. But I'm saying that Mary is using him as an instrument. He draws us to prayer, and in that prayer, Mary intercedes for us. The church became known not just for the praying dog, but as a place where miracles happened. Yet Charlie remained unchanged, humble, focused, devoted. Every morning at 6 o'clock, he took his place before the Virgin Mary. Margaret often said, "Charlie doesn't know he's famous. He doesn't know about the testimonies or the crowds. He only knows Mary, and that's what makes him so powerful." The purity of his devotion was his greatest testimony. Chapter 11. As the seasons turned and years accumulated, Charlie began to show his age. His steps grew slower, his once recovering fur now flecked with gray. His body, which had been at death's door when Margaret first found him, was finally yielding to time. But his devotion never wavered. Even on mornings when his joints clearly ached, when the cold made him tremble, when age made every movement difficult, Charlie still rose at 6 o'clock and made his way to the church. Margaret, herself growing frilier with each passing year, watched with tears in her eyes as the faithful dog refused to break his sacred routine. "He's teaching us something," she told Father Martinez one morning. "Even when our bodies fail, our spirits can remain strong. Even when everything hurts, we can still come before Mary." The community rallied around their aging messenger. Volunteers began waiting at Margaret's door each morning to help Charlie make the journey. They carried blankets to warm him, cushions for him to rest on, and walked slowly beside him across the square. But once inside the church, Charlie wanted no assistance. He would gently pull away from helping hands and make his way to the altar on his own, however long it took. His prostration remained the same, paws stretched forward, head bowed, complete surrender before the Virgin Mary. He's showing us that devotion isn't about strength or youth. Father Martinez preached one Sunday. It's about faithfulness. Charlie could have stopped years ago. He's earned his rest. But he continues because his love for Mary transcends physical limitations. People wept watching the elderly dog pray. His perseverance became its own sermon, perhaps more powerful than any words could convey. And still, morning after morning, Charlie came, faithful until the end. Chapter 12 now. Tell me what happened with Charlie. Was it a miracle, an instinct, or a sign you needed to see today? The story of Charlie reminds us that miracles have not ended. They happen every day when we open our hearts to the love of the Blessed Mother. Charlie's journey from a dying dog on a church doorstep to a spiritual beacon for thousands proves that Mary works through the most unlikely vessels. She chose a creature without words to teach us how to pray. She used an abandoned animal to rekindle faith in an entire generation. Margaret, who rescued Charlie that rainy October morning, always maintained, "I didn't save Charlie. Mary saved both of us." He taught me more about devotion than I ever taught him about survival. Father Martinez, who witnessed Charlie's daily prayers for years, often reflected, "In a world full of noise and distraction, Charlie showed us the power of silence and consistency. He proved that true devotion requires no eloquence, only sincerity." And Emma, the little girl who regained her hearing beside the praying dog, grew up to become a testimony of Mary's continuing intercession. She visits the church every year on the anniversary of her healing, kneeling in the same spot where Charlie once prayed beside her. The church in that small Kentucky town remains a place of pilgrimage. The altar where Charlie prostrated himself is now marked with a small plaque commemorating his faithful devotion. Visitors still come seeking Mary's intercession, inspired by the story of a dog who learned to pray. Share your opinion in the comments. Leave a like if this story strengthened your faith. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next miracles. And may the Virgin Mary bless your path, just as she blessed Charlie's, transforming an abandoned life into a vessel of divine grace.